I'm Liz Waterhouse and I'm a spokesperson for Reclaim the Night Perth. Reclaim the Night has been running annual marches around the world since 1977 to highlight issues of women's safety and male violence against women. As a Reclaim the Night spokesperson, I was to deliver a speech at the March for Justice event on Sunday, March 14, 2021. However, I was deplatformed a week prior to the event without explanation. Despite being deplatformed as Reclaim the Night Perth's speaker, myself and a group of other feminists and past Reclaim the Night organisers attended the event in solidarity with other feminists and citizens concerned about women's rights. I will speak further about what happened in the organising of March for Justice, why we were deplatformed, and what the implications of that are for women's organising in another video. In this video, I will read the speech I had intended to deliver at the March for Justice rally. We meet on Whadjuk land of the Noongar Nation. This land was not ceded but stolen. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and their elders, past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. We are gathered here today because we are outraged by recently reported sexual violence against women and by the apparent impunity with which perpetrators escape accountability and justice. Statistics tell us that of all reported rapes in Australia, under 1% result in a guilty verdict and jail time for perpetrators. That is, 99 out of 100 reported rapes go unpunished. We also know that rape is an underreported crime and that therefore less than 1% of rapes result in a conviction and jail time. It is also known that rape is a crime with a lower false report rate than other crimes. Statistics also tell us that 1 in 5 Australian women experience sexual violence after 15 years of age, with 1 in 6 experiencing physical or sexual violence before 15 years of age. These statistics represent far too much injustice and human suffering, and it is unacceptable. Over the last 10 years, hundreds of women have been murdered by men, and predominantly by partners and ex-partners, not by strangers, but by people they trusted. This is not news to any of us. It is the very air we breathe, that women are not safe from male violence in public spaces, at work or at home, and even from men they know and love, is cause for alarm, upset and anger. We are outraged by the recently reported cases of sexual violence in Parliament and by the very poor response by parliamentarians. We are upset and angered by how the victims have been let down by their colleagues, democratically elected officials paid by the public purse. Should we not be able to trust that these people paid very well to work in the interests of our society and its citizens would conduct themselves with a greater sense of decency, accountability and justice? So, as we register shock and anger for what has happened, let us reflect on the state of affairs nationwide and indeed globally. Here in Australia, we know that more than 1 woman a week is killed by a man. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mothers are 17.5 times more likely to be killed than non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mothers. Women with disabilities are significantly more likely to be raped and experience longer periods of violence. Domestic and family violence is the leading cause of homelessness in Australia, and homelessness is a key risk factor in removal of children by the state. Horrifyingly, 1/3 of women who experience domestic violence first experience it when pregnant. Women attempt leaving abusive partners 7 times on average before being successful. We also know that when a woman leaves is the most dangerous time for her in terms of the possibility of her being abused or murdered. It is well understood that our systems do not support women and children with Indigenous, non-English speaking, low income and otherwise marginalised backgrounds. The lack of availability of affordable, safe housing due to under-resourced social housing and too few refuges means women leaving domestic violence situations too often go unprotected. This is compounded by inappropriate responses by child protection and police engagement, which can result in the removal of their children or even their own arrest. In 2014, for example, in a known Western Australian case, Ms. Jew called Headland Police for help in a domestic violence scenario and was subsequently arrested for unpaid fines. Her medical needs were disregarded and she was generally mistreated. Sadly, Ms. Jew died as a result of injuries and state neglect. There are many other appalling accounts of systemic failure with regard to domestic violence. We must acknowledge the terrible toll on women in society, many who are already exploited, traumatised, marginalised and disempowered. This must be said over and over because those who have fewer options and fewer protections are mostly without a voice. Globally we see systemic exploitation of women in poverty. 35% of women worldwide are estimated to have experienced either physical or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence. 79% of human trafficking is sex trafficking, with a staggering estimated 4.8 million people forced into sexual exploitation, the overwhelming majority being women and girls. Sex trafficking is estimated to make $99 billion per annum in profit for traffickers on the back of female misery. Women in the sex trade have higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder than frontline soldiers. In some countries, lesbian women are targets of sexual violence in the form of corrective rape. Female infanticide remains a significant problem, with an estimated 130 million missing women in the world as a result of selective abortion and excess female deaths. Every year, an inconceivable 12 million girls are forced into being child brides. That's more than 7 times the population of Perth. It is estimated that 200 million girls and women alive today living in 31 countries have undergone FGM, female genital mutilation. The untold misery of these women beggars belief. These statistics go on and on endlessly, painting a picture of a world in which women experience a disproportionate share of brutal violence and exploitation. Yet globally, so very little of the sexual violence and exploitation that female humans endure even makes the news. How is it that a magnitude of injustice so ugly and so immense, and the woeful enormity of human suffering that it causes, does not galvanise us into action? Observing the history of the women's liberation movement, however, we see the capacity for working together to achieve meaningful change. For example, in Australia in the past, women were entrapped in marriages and partnerships with violent men because of economic dependence. But today, women have access to at least some income support for leaving violent partners. This we take for granted, but this essential empowerment tool was fought for and won by people working together for change. Thankfully, women's access to safe abortions has expanded, saving countless women's lives. Rape in marriage was outlawed between 1976 and 1981 across Australian states, ending the legal status of women as possessions of their husbands. From 1965, women were allowed in public bars. There are many women still alive today who well remember not having access to public life equal with men. In 1971, Westpac became the first bank in Australia to allow women to take out a loan without a male guarantor. We see that women's involvement across varying public spheres has increased. Female participation in all areas of society is a precondition to women's needs being met. The interests of women must be represented by women. In the words of the great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, women belong in all the places where decisions are being made. There has been so much change for women in the last century, and we are indebted to the tireless work of our forebears who fought for and won the improved conditions we now take for granted. But more change is needed, and we are here to fight for improved social conditions for women and girls. Here at March for Justice, what is it we are demanding? For what purpose have we gathered? For women's safety at work, for equality and for justice. Yes, these are worthy aims, and it's wonderful that all of us have come together to push towards those outcomes. While we cannot legislate to ensure that women will always be safe at work, we can legislate for accountability for perpetrators and justice for victims. And while we cannot prevent abuses, we can demand a proportional response to it. That is justice, and it is that justice that is an expression of the moral position of our society, that sexual abuse is wrong and will not be tolerated. And that is the message we have come together to assert today, the message we impress upon our leaders. We demand change. These things we are here to demand, and it is right, but let us further examine more deeply and more widely issues for women and girls in our society and beyond. I posit that at the heart of it, we need to reform the very way we understand what it means to be a man or a woman. Men don't rape or sexually harass females because they don't know that it is wrong. They do it because they want to and they can, and because society largely allows them to. Male sexual entitlement and general dominance over females is invisibly ingrained into our very culture. Evidence of that is discernible when, for instance, when we hear of a rape and then not an insistence that males desist in raping, but women being urged to take care. We hear that a drunk or sleeping woman is like an unlocked car, just there to be raped. Is this not victim blaming? Why do we negate the issue of male agency and responsibility? Are we simply to accept that boys will be boys? Is that all we think of men? Are men inherently abusers with nothing to be done? Is it just nature and not nurture? Surely we have to believe that males can be better. I believe they can. Not all men rape or would. The thought is and should be abhorrent to many men. As mothers and fathers, aunties and uncles, teachers and friends, let's raise our boys to see rape as unthinkable as cannibalism. Let's raise our girls to assert their boundaries and demand respect. Let's work for a culture beyond power-based sex role stereotypes. Let's break down sex-based expectations of behaviour, personality, life paths, division of labour, and so on and so forth. Further, let's examine how attitudes and structures around race, class, disability and sexuality inflect women's experiences of sexism. Further still, observe and understand how intergenerational disadvantage and trauma manifest and compound sexism and violence against women. There is so much more to be said on this topic, and I can only scratch the surface in the time permitted. It is very encouraging that so many of us have gathered today in solidarity to work together towards making the world safer and fairer for women and girls. In solidarity, Liz Waterhouse for Reclaim the Night Perth Collective. Thank you for listening.